free from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but Thee, dear Lord, none but Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea.
All right, so the entire Gospel of Matthew is dedicated to establishing who Jesus is. Uh, it focuses on the fact that He is the Messiah, that He is the King, the Savior. It focuses on the fact that He is the Son of God. It focuses on the fact that He is Emmanuel, God with us. It focuses on the fact that He is the teacher greater than Moses that had been prophesied about by Moses himself. It focuses on the fact that He is the fulfillment of all of God's promises and that He is the judge of all the nations. But Matthew doesn't conclude merely by restating those truths. That is the way that we tend to do things. What is that old saying? Advice for preachers. Tell them what you're going to say it, tell them what you said, and sit down. That is essentially how we write. The introduction of papers, when it's especially scholarly work, but just about anything, the introduction is, this is what I'm going to tell you. The body is telling it in more complete detail, and the conclusion is, this is what I proved. This is what I told you. Same thing in court cases. Opening arguments, the lawyers get up there before the jury and say, this is what we're going to prove to you. They spend the time in the case laying out the arguments and supplying the evidence for that, and then they offer their summation at the end saying, this is what we showed you. But that is not the model that Matthew uses. He concludes by, and I'm going to use the word forcing. Don't think of this as force like with a weapon. But he compels. I think that's a better word to use. He compels the reader of the gospel to answer a question. And that question is, what will I do with Jesus, with His authority, with His teaching? The gospel moves from revelation, the revelation of who He is, to responsibility. From identity to allegiance, from hearing to obedience. And so it's a very practical thing in that respect. It's not just informative. Like a good sermon, what it is doing is pushing us to do something about the information, to change. the way in which we live, to change the way in which we think, to change the things that we say and do in response to the information that it's offered. Um, Jesus himself rejected empty profession. And so if we go back to Matthew 7 and look at verses 21, 22, and 23, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, do many miracles in your name? And I will announce to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreakers. Matthew ends the Sermon on the Mount with a warning against lip service, with a warning against verbal religion. There is a lot of that in the world. There's a lot of people, and not just religion, by the way. It's particularly bad in religion, but it's in other things as well. Allegiance that is professed to family. There are people all over this world who, for instance, are married and will tell folks, "Oh, I love my wife, I love my husband," but they're not faithful to the relationship. Same thing when it comes to the country that we live in. A lot of people will profess things about the country and their love for their country, and then they do things to undermine the well-being of the country. Same thing with their well, let's get smaller, their community. I love my neighborhood. I love my community. I love my job, their employment. It used to be that people were loyal to their employers. Not so much anymore. And that's the way we are with God as well. A lot of times we put bumper stickers on our car that say, I love Jesus, but we don't live that way. Or sometimes it's even worse. Sometimes we're talking to people about our faith and making faith claims, and almost in the same breath, we begin to utter curses. And God talks about that as well. So it's not new when he talks about that out of the same mouth should not flow both blessings and curses. And he uses an illustration with regard to that and says you don't get bitter water from a sweet well. And so what Jesus is doing here is saying, look, saying that I am Lord is very different than respecting my lordship. So these individuals that he's talking about here use the correct title, Lord, Lord. They make religious claims. Did you notice that? Lord, did we not? What'd they say? Did we not? I got to get back to the verse. Prophesy in your name. Now, that's a religious thing, isn't it? Yep. Religious thing to prophesy and cast out demons. That's a good, noble work. Do many miracles in your name. Made all sorts of religious claims and appeals to their religious works. But what's his response? I never knew you. Why? I think it's interesting. Because of their lawlessness. What does that mean, lawlessness? I'm sorry? Okay, without law. But in this context specifically, what's he talking about? Doing what they want and acting as though they had no obligations based upon what God has said, as if they function without any law. And by the way, that is the way a lot of religious people not just practice faith today, but actually profess and preach faith today. They act as though we have no obligations at all, that we're free to do what we want to do because of grace and because of mercy. And they want to talk only about the mercy of God and not about the commands of God. They only want to talk about the grace of God and not about the judgment of God. And he's dealing with that while he's on the earth. And Matthew kind of starts the teaching of Jesus with this recorded sermon that starts in chapter 5 and runs through chapter 7, which ends with this focus. That it's not enough just to read Matthew 5 and 6 and say, oh, that sounds great. What a great guy. Yeah, Jesus is a prophet. Yeah, Jesus was a great teacher. He was a great moral man. How many people do you hear say, oh, you need to live by the words in the red? What Jesus said, boy, that's good stuff. You know why they say that? Because they think by doing that, they can escape judgment. Problem is they're not even paying attention to the words in the red. Because these words are in the red. And he says, there's going to be all these people making all these claims about their association with me. And I'm going to say, I never knew you. You were workers of, some translations put it, iniquity, lawlessness. You were just acting like there was no governing principles. You could do what you wanted to do. The issue isn't recognition. That's not the issue that the Gospel of Matthew focuses on. The issue is submission. It's not whether I recognize God, it's whether I submit to God. It's not whether I recognize Jesus, it's whether I submit to Jesus. And so he's consistently, throughout this gospel, exposed the danger of outward association, of lip service, absent of actual faithful obedience. Chapter 7, verse 19, the fruitless trees. What does Jesus teach about the fruitless trees? They'll be cut down and cast into a fire. Matthew 13, the Gospel of Matthew talks about the bad soil that produces nothing that endures, bears no fruit. Matthew 24 and 25, the wicked servants are judged. Really starts in 23. So throughout this entire gospel, over and over and over again, either parables of Jesus or direct teaching of Jesus, or the record that Matthew gives us of things shows us that empty profession is damnable. So the gospel leaves no room for detached admiration of Jesus, which is, again, what the world is for. There's one point in the Bible where it tells us that even the demons believe and tremble. You know what that's talking about? That's talking about detached admiration. And the world is full of those kinds of people. Even Islam offers detached admiration of Jesus. What they don't do is acknowledge that he is divine and submit. So, what Matthew is doing is forcing the reader to understand that Jesus doesn't merely demand Okay, every fire truck in Lafayette just passed. Jesus doesn't merely demand that we admire him or acknowledge him or even use the appropriate titles for him. Show him respect. But he demands obedience from us. What happens when there is hearing of Jesus? By the way, what's that word hearing mean? Okay, and it's more than just being in the room and having a reception of the audible sounds of something that is said or done. It is understanding as well. That's part of the communication process. Part of the communication process is not just putting information out there, but it's the reception of that information. That's why you don't have communication where you have someone that speaks one language and someone else that hears not in that language. So when it came to the use of the spiritual gift of tongues, for instance, in Corinth, where everyone spoke the same language, and someone could speak in a tongue that was a different language, but no one in the room could understand it, what was the assessment of that situation? One of two things had to happen. Either the person should say nothing because it couldn't be understood, or there had to be someone there to do what? Interpret it so that it could be understood. Because in order for the edification to take place that assemblies like this are supposed to bring about, there had to be communication. There had to be hearing. He talks about hearing without obedience and says that's useless. It's destructive even. Verses 24 through 27 of Matthew 7. Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house, yet it did not collapse because its foundation was on the rock. That's what hearing and doing accomplishes. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house, and it collapsed. It collapsed with a great crash. That's the Christian Standard Bible, by the way, for people that are curious. That final illustration of the Sermon on the Mount is very direct. It's very unavoidable. There are two different people in the illustration. There are two different classes in application of people, but only one of them survives. Only one of them stands up to the test. Only one of them remains to stand. The other collapses. Based upon what? The one who acts upon the words. So you can't study the book of Matthew without coming to grasp that what he's saying is that the distinction between people is not whether they hear this information. The distinction is how they react to it. It's the response to this information. The wise man obeys and the foolish man does not. If we make this illustration and expand the illustration that Matthew uses here in chapter 7 and make it even more practical and more detailed, if a builder is given building plans and the building code that says this is how this says this is what you need to build, and this says this is how it needs to be built. and he reads the plans and he reads the code book, the house is only good if what happens? If he follows the code and builds it according to plan. What happens when they don't follow the code? Well, look it up sometime in especially South Florida. A lot of large condominium buildings over the last decade or so have collapsed. You know why they collapsed? They didn't follow the code. And it couldn't stand up to the nature of the ground in Florida and the humidity in Florida and the winds of Florida and the hurricanes of Florida. They just couldn't stand up over time because it didn't actually act on. They heard the code, they know what it says, they can pass the test. They got their license to be builders. They just didn't act on it. And the destruction that followed is exactly the destruction that follows, or exactly like the destruction that follows one of us who takes the information that God has given to us that pertains to life and godliness and tells us all things pertaining to life and godliness, and then we hear it, but we do nothing about it. How does James talk about that guy? He says yes, and this has to be a good illustration because I've remembered it since the day I heard it. I'll give credit where credit's due. It's Brother D. Bowman who has passed away at this point, but he was preaching and he brought that text up and he said, he said that'd be like me getting up from the breakfast table this morning and walking into the bathroom to get ready to leave and have a big blob of country butter on my chin. And I look at it and I see this big blob of country butter on my chin, and I turn around and walk out and I do nothing about it and I forget that it's there. And then I walk in here and what's the purpose in that? Why did he go look in the mirror to begin with? Now, this is a side of it that we don't talk about very often. Why do we look in the mirror to begin with? I can tell you right now, I don't look in the mirror because I think I'm good looking and I enjoy looking at myself. That's not why I look in a mirror. Why do we look in a mirror? How many of you have a house that doesn't have a mirror in it? I don't see any hands. How many of you have a car that doesn't have a mirror in it? And I'm talking about the ones outside, or even the one on your windshield that's helping you see the cars behind you. I'm talking about vanity mirrors for you to look at yourself in. Why? Why are they there? Why do we have mirrors everywhere? Is there a bathroom anywhere that doesn't have a mirror behind the sink? There are public bathrooms in the park in my neighborhood that have mirrors in them. Why? Well, because we look in those things to order ourselves, to see what's out of place and to fix it. Why in the world do we read the Bible if it's not to be corrected by the Bible and to be changed? That's what he's asking. Why hear and not do? And he said, failure to obey Christ is not a minor thing, it's catastrophic. It's catastrophic folly to entertain the words of Christ and then not obey them. And great was its fall. How'd the kids say it? And the house on the sand went flat. Yet we do it all the time. You can't read Matthew's gospel without being confronted by these things. So we've got this gospel of Jesus Christ as it's delivered. And the conclusion to this is not consider these things. Here's some information for you to consider. I'm just proffering these things for your thought. It's not reflect on these things. It's not admire this teaching. He says, act upon these words. That's what the call is. Act upon these words. The risen Christ possesses absolute authority. That's the argument that he actually ends with. Matthew 28:18. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. What does all authority mean? Does it mean some? Does it mean a little? Does it mean even most? It means all. Every. There is no authority outside of his authority. And then he says, so that we understand the breadth of where he's talking about. Listen, in some places, I might have all authority. They're really, really tiny places. Really tiny places. Upstairs in my house, when you get to the top of the stairs, if you take a right and you go into the room that's on the right as you get to the top of the stairs, that is now my home office. And when I'm in there by myself and the doors are closed, I have complete authority. My granddaughter gets up there, I no longer have complete authority. But for the moments that I'm there by myself, that is my domain. I decided where the furniture was. I decided what was in the room and what's, well, I didn't completely decide what was in the room and what wasn't in the room. But the stuff that's in the room that I don't really want in there, I can move and hide it and push it and shove it where I want it to get it out of the way. Hardly anybody goes in that room except me and my dog and my granddaughter. Unless, of course, my daughter and grandkids are staying at the house, and then that's their room and I lose it completely. So again, I don't always have all authority there. But for brief periods of time, very specific circumstances, in that little bitty room, I have all authority. Where is Jesus's all authority? He says, in heaven and on earth. And we might add to that, and under the earth. That's kind of the point of Jonah, right? What did Jonah find out that the extent of God's authority was? Everywhere, even in the bottom of the ocean. When he was at the bottom of the sea and the seaweed was locking him in and his life was about to end, God had the authority to do what? To deliver him, to come to his rescue. God knew he was there. God heard his cries. God delivered him. That's the prayer of the book of Jonah, by the way. What is that, the 3rd chapter? Maybe wrong about the chapter number, but I think it's chapter 3. He's not praying for deliverance. He's praying thanksgiving because of his deliverance. All authority in heaven and on earth. This is Matthew's final declaration. Is the person I have introduced you to and told you about and gave you this information about has all authority. That's the statement the entire gospel has been moving toward. He demonstrated Christ's authority over disease. How did he do that? He recorded incidents where Jesus healed the sick. He showed that he had authority over even demons. How did he show that? By his casting them out at his word. He had authority over nature. How did he show that? Okay, we got the storm, we got the walking on the water thing. There's several different things, but there's a couple of points yesterday. If I had that authority, I might have stopped the rain for a little bit. I know in 2016 I would have. I had friends who got water in their house. I know in 2017 I would have. I had parents who lost much of what they owned. If I had the authority to do it, you think I would have sit there and not done it? He has authority over sin. How did he tell us that? He forgave sins. And I really, really appreciate the way he did it. At least in one case, where he looked down at a guy who was lame from birth and said, "Arise and walk." No, he didn't say that, did he? He said, "Your sins are forgiven." And everybody went, "Clearly, you're guilty of blasphemy because only God can forgive sins." And he says, "Well, yeah, and that's the point, to show you that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." And then he says, which is easier, to say, "Arise and walk," or to say your sins are forgiven? And the fact of the matter is, if you have authority over one, you have authority over the other. And we don't have the authority over either, but he did. And so he shows us that. He shows us that he has the authority over death. How did he do that? By showing us people being raised from the dead. He showed us that he had the authority over Scripture. How did he do that? Okay, "But I say unto you" is one way. He did it another way as well, when he demonstrated that he was Lord of Sabbath. There was an accusation that came against his disciples for picking grain on the Sabbath. And he goes through this explanation of why what they did was not wrong at all. And he said, "So that you know that the Son of Man is Lord of Sabbath." Where'd the Sabbath come from? The law of God, the Ten Commandments. He showed that he was an authority over the Scriptures and over the kingdom. And now the risen Christ openly declares that he has universal authority. In heaven and on earth, all authority is in me. There's not partial authority. There's not regional authority. There's not symbolic authority. There's all authority. Matthew began with the birth of a king, and he ends with the enthronement of the king. The resurrection is not merely proof that Jesus lives, it's the public validation of his universal rule. By the way, that's what the opening of Romans says, is that he was proved to be the Son of God with power by the resurrection of the dead. The Great Commission is a command for submission. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. It's not merely to spread information about Jesus. That's not the commission. It is to produce disciples, and it's to do so where? Everywhere. Teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. So we get a definition of discipleship very early. Go make disciples. Okay, well, what does disciples look like? What am I teaching people to be when I make them a disciple? To observe all that I've commanded you. What does observe mean? To watch it happen? Is that what observe means in that context? It means to practice it, to engage in it, to be obedient. So the gospel ends exactly where the Sermon on the Mount ended. The entire book ends in exactly the same place that the first sermon that's recorded in the book ends. That the issue is about obedience. He doesn't separate faith from submission. He doesn't separate discipleship from obedience. He doesn't separate confession from practice. He says that all authority rests in Christ and that the authority of Christ demands our response. The nations are not called merely to acknowledge Jesus. They're commanded to submit to him. Now, the irony is the way God operates with man is though he offers his grace and mercy through these things, and he utters the command for us to submit and obey, he also allows us to do what? He allows us to refuse, to say no, and to do what we want to do. So he has all authority. Does he always exercise all authority? And the answer is no. He doesn't always exercise all. You don't have to exercise authority. Is there a day in where he is going to exercise all authority? Absolutely. There's a day in which all this is going to be called to an end. The elements are going to be destroyed. All men are going to be raised. All men are going to face the judgment, and they're going to go not where they want to go, but they're going to go where? Where they're ordered to go. Either taken into the presence of God or banished from the presence of God. And nothing that we want or nothing that we are trying to do or nothing that we even become willing to do will matter. Today, I can choose to willingly confess Christ, and that matters. But when he returns and every knee bows before him and confesses him as Lord, it doesn't have that same impact. There's going to be a point in which he exercises all authority and he compels obedience, but that is not today. Instead, he issues the order and he looks and seeks for those who are willing to obey. So, the major themes in the few seconds we have left: Jesus, the Messiah King. It begins with the record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, Matthew 1. It ends with all authority has been given to me. These things are tied together. Jesus as Emmanuel, or as the Son of God, or as the fulfillment. Matthew chapter 1 and verse 23, they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being translated is God with us. What's it end with? Matthew 28:20, I am with you always. These things are connected. Opens with God came to be with us. It ends with him saying, I'm always with you. Jesus is the new Moses. The teaching of Jesus in the gospel begins at the Sermon on the Mount, which is an echoed presentation of Moses and Sinai in the giving of the law. Jesus concludes the gospel by commanding all the nations to obey his teaching. He's a lawgiver greater. He's a teacher greater than Moses. Moses delivered his law where? To the Israelites. Jesus delivered his law to whom? All men everywhere. So then we look at Jesus. And by the way, Moses delivered the Israelites. Jesus delivers all men everywhere. Jesus and the nations. The gospel began with Abraham, which is to connect to all the promises that were made to Abraham. Through your seed, all the nations will be blessed. And it ends with what? It ends with all nations. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every nation. So there is a theme to this gospel, which is not intended simply to say, let me tell you something about Jesus. It's intended to say, this is who he is. Now you have to decide. You have to decide what you're going to do in response to it. And there's going to be a consequence to your decision. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people running around out there in the world who haven't read Matthew and who believe that there are no consequences to their decision. That they can make the decision to spurn the invitation of Christ, and it's not going to cost them anything. Matthew doesn't leave any room for that. Anybody have any questions or comments? All right. I think next week I'll be gone. This class is over. So my next class will start when I get back. Haven't decided for sure yet. I'm centering in on something that I think I want to study that we've probably never, I know we've never studied here, but you may not have ever studied it in your life. But if you have any thoughts, we got a couple of weeks before that class. If you got any thoughts about what you would like to look at or a direction that we might go, please share them with me and I'll consider them.
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea.